Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks, as you're joining. We are just going to wait about 1 minute as we let people filter into the webinar. So please just hang tight. We'll get started here in about 1 minute. Hey, for those just joining, we are just waiting about 1 minute as we wait for the room to populate. Just hang tight. We'll get started here very shortly. All right. Thanks everyone that was able to join us this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome. Today we are going to be going over the 2023 highlights in Nautobot's core, cloud, and app ecosystem. 3 pillars with one goal: simplified network automation. The agenda we're going through today, we'll do some introductions, go over that 3-pillar strategy and introduce that. Then start diving into each of those pillars. So looking at Nautobot v2, the app ecosystem, Nautobot cloud. We'll have some time for some Q&A. And here, as we are going through the session, please do use the Q&A section down there on the bottom of your Zoom screen, please. It's better that way that we can track the questions and share them with everyone versus if you try to send us a chat. So please do use the Q&A for questions as we go through. And we will try to pepper those in throughout the session as makes sense. And any of those that are left over, we will address there at the end. Little review there then, that 3-pillar strategy in action, and finally conclusion for our agenda today. Next up, some intros, or first up, some intros here. So joining us today, we have Jason Edelman, our founder and CTO, myself, Tim Shryack, the Director of Sales Engineering, John Anderson, Principal Consultant and Nautobot Product Owner, and finally, Jeff Kella, our Senior Architect, that will be presenting here throughout the session. So the 3-pillar strategy, let's kind of take a look at what that means and what we intend here. The goal is really about how are we removing those barriers to adoption of automation in your environment so you can really focus on what your priorities are. Starting off with Nautobot v2, the core platform, right? So we're going to go into the details of that and what we have done there, the differences, all of the benefits that we've brought in Nautobot v2 and all of the great things that we're doing in that area. Coupled to there then is that app ecosystem, how we can use applications on top of the Nautobot core in order to drive faster, more efficient outcomes to get us to the goal. We'll go through some of the great work that we've done over the past year on those apps and give you some details there. And finally, something that we were really excited about in 2023, Nautobot Cloud, really allowing you to have that quick, easy deployment of the use and consumption of Nautobot and Nautobot applications. So with that, we're going to go into Nautobot v2, and I'm going to hand off to John here, who will take over and give you those details.
All right, thanks, Tim. Yeah, lovely to be here. John Anderson, I'm the product owner for Nautobot. So let's dive in. So for anyone that may be unfamiliar, Nautobot is our platform and network to code for 2 primary sets of use cases. It's an open source source of truth, and it's a network automation platform. So on the source of truth side, this is really about collecting and curating all of the data that is critical to network automation needs, right? This is things that can be as simple as tracking your inventory of devices, their interfaces, and so forth, right? But it's so much more, right? It's all of the rich relationships between that data, right? It's being able to connect those interfaces together, put the layer 3 addresses on those interfaces, track VLANs, ASNs, other BGP data, and that kind of thing, right? And it's a very extensible platform in that we have things like user definable relationships and additional attributes through custom fields, right? So you can tailor that network source of truth to your organization's specific needs. And on the automation platform side, right, we build on top of that fundamental set of data requirements and build in an extensible platform through additional applications and other capabilities that enable tremendous amounts of automation use cases. We've got things like golden configuration that we'll go through today for managing your network at scale. Things like the data validation engine that build on top of that network source of truth to ensure that we've got our organizational specific data constraints well at hand. The floor plan app that you'll be able to see here today for tracking how racks and devices are physically laid out in our data centers and so forth, right? We've got a rich chat ops ecosystem as well that creates some really both fun but extremely useful ways to interact with the platform. Quick access to our data within the areas where our engineers are already talking, right? And from an enterprise standpoint, right, we've got deep integrations with lots of other systems, secrets management platforms, so that we are adhering to enterprise best practices for how we manage confidential and proprietary data for things like credentials for connecting to devices and so forth, right? Circuit maintenance, there's so many apps built on top of this platform, but it's really the combination of these two primary use cases that make Nautobot the premier network automation source of truth and automation platform in the ecosystem today. So 2023 was a really big year for Nautobot. We launched our version 2, and that's really kind of culminated in two really big releases for us, the 2.0 train and then the 2.1 train towards the end of the year. And that is the current stable release is that 2.1 release train. But in those set of releases, we've had a lot of work, specifically some improvements to the user interface that we'll go through in a demo today. We have made some substantial improvements to the IPAM data model. So for users that are tracking, prefixes and IP addresses and so forth, you'd definitely be interested in what we've done there from a performance and usability standpoint. We have made also some pretty big improvements to the location data model that we'll go through that, again, harking to the flexibility in the platform allows you to create organizational specific location hierarchies and really get as granular as you need to from a location tracking standpoint. Jobs we'll talk a little bit about, but we could spend days talking about jobs. That is one of the foundational components of the automation platform side of Nautobot, but we have added some capabilities there that allow job authors to produce files, really any type that you want, as output from jobs, and then users have a elegant way in the interface to download those files. So enables a lot of really advanced reporting use cases, maybe config generation, for example, and so forth. And that also backs some changes that we've made fundamentally in the platform for exporting data, and this will also help with importing data in the future as well. The external integration model is something new that came in the 2.1 release, and that is going to be the foundation for how we build automated integrations with other systems down the road. But this is a standardized way for specifying parameters for connecting to external systems and so forth that we can then consume in jobs or single source of truth integrations and so forth. And unfortunately, there's just so much that's included in V2 that we couldn't possibly cover it all here today. We have done a specific webinar in the past on Nautobot V2, and I'm sure the team can paste that link in the chat here for anyone that hasn't had a chance or opportunity to check that out. When we close out here today, you can certainly check that out. But with that, I will jump into a short demo here of some of these new features in Nautobot V2. I'm over here in our demo environment, and if we go back to the homepage here, this is the first thing that you would see when you log into Nautobot, just a kind of overview of all of your data and different assets that you're tracking within Nautobot here. The first thing that let's take a look at is the enhanced IPAM functionality. So if we go over here in the nav menu and take a look at everything that we can track in IPAM, obviously IP addresses, right? but prefixes, and notably the prefix hierarchy, right? But one of the brand new things in Nautobot 2 is this concept of namespaces. So namespaces are maybe a little more advanced topic, but what they enable at their root is namespaces now define the sole uniqueness boundaries for address space. So, we can imagine if we're a larger organization and we have a lot of overlapping or duplicate address space because, we've done a lot of mergers or acquisitions, or, we're maybe a managed service provider that deploys a lot of cookie cutter types of, network segments that all look the same, right? And maybe have the exact same addressing schemes, right? Namespaces enable us to basically put those parts of the IPAM address space in buckets that don't conflict with one another, right? So that we can properly and effectively document the network, but do it in a sane way here. So we assign those namespaces to prefixes and IP addresses and so forth, as you might imagine, right? But if we look at our prefix hierarchy, one of the biggest things that has changed in Nautobot 2 is we have specific and explicit relationships for parents and children. I apologize, the demo environment is running a little bit behind today, but yeah, here we are. So we have direct relationships between parent and children prefixes now. So in the past, that relationship was kind of derived on the fly based on an understanding of the natural hierarchy that exists with IPv4 and IPv6 networks. But by explicitly declaring that relationship between a /16 and its parent /8 in this case, right? We gain a lot of performance improvements when we have a lot of data at scale here. So users with even moderate data sets in the IPAM realm will see a lot of improvements and performance gains for migrating up to Nautobot v2 here, right? But what we're able to do with specifying different types here is really create 3 different categories of networks, right? So we've got containers, which are basically just ways that we carve up the network, right? So this /8 may not actually exist out on the network somewhere, right? It's just a container that we allocate other networks from, right? So then we've got this /16 and then a /18 that are also containers underneath there. Finally, we get to what we call a network, which is just a /24 in this case, as we've defined it. And this is a network is a prefix or subnet that would actually be deployed on the network, right? So this is a prefix that may be that you would actually find in a configuration on a device's interface, for instance, right? And you can see that it has a relationship to a VLAN here, and to a location that it is assigned to as well. And that's a good transition over to the enhancements to the location hierarchy that we've got here. So if we look at this hierarchy of locations, imagine we are a higher ed institution that's being exemplified here, and we want to designate the different campuses that we've got, the different departments that exist throughout that campus, and then ultimately the buildings that make up our institution. We can create that location hierarchy if we go over here to the specific building. This is the representation, for whatever Cedar Grove Hall is at this institution, right? And you notice we have these different types, and this is really the foundation of the enhancements that we've made to the location hierarchy. If we click on that type, the building here, we can see what the definition of these quote unquote location types are. So we've got a type called campus, and we've got a type called department, and then a building lives within a department, right? So obviously, these aren't real locations. We're just defining the hierarchy that makes sense to our organization. Again, imagining that we're a university in this example, right? And so each type of location can have specified the types of data that can be associated to it. So we're saying that buildings can have devices or racks or prefixes assigned to those locations. So this is actually really powerful because it helps ensure that our data is accurate and correct in the system, because we're going to prevent people from saying that a device, can't belong to just a department or just a campus, right? It has to be assigned to a building, right? The system will not allow us because we haven't said that a device can be assigned to a department here. And we'll see that the nestable attribute is checked here on department, and we see that flag here as well if we hover over it. What that means is that we can have departments nested under other departments, and if we went back to our locations list view here, we can see exactly that, right? So we had a campus. And then we have the College of Arts and Sciences, which is a department. And then we have the specific anthropology department that lives within that college, right? And then we have the building for that department. And so you can see that, here we have two departments. And that's because we're saying that that particular type is nestable. So that, can definitely be helpful in like data center environments, right? Where you want to say like, I've got cages in my data center, and then I've got rows inside of my cages, and maybe those are kind of nestable, right? Like maybe there's cages inside of cages, right? For different tenants, that kind of thing. And that's a good point to mention too, right? So this example shows kind of the physical side of the location hierarchy. It is perfectly acceptable to even go down to the logical side, right? So you could model a data center down to the rows or specific racks obviously within that data center, but you could go even further into a logical sense of saying these are maybe the zones that exist within my data center from a logical networking perspective. You can definitely do that with the location hierarchy as well. So yeah, that obviously there's a lot more that you can see from a UI perspective that we have spent a lot of time on in our version 2 release here, kind of cleaning it up and giving a new look and feel to Nautobot. And you will continue to see more of that through 2024, especially as we get into our 3.0 realm much later in the year in 2024. I'd love to spend some more time here, but I do have to, give some time for everyone else that has other exciting things to show. But I will pause here and ask Tim, are there any questions that I can answer at this time?
Yeah, we've had a few come in, and for those in the audience, please do feel free to use the Q&A as we go through if you have specific questions. But for John here, one of the things you were talking about namespaces, you introduced that concept. For those maybe familiar with tenants, like how does tenants compare to namespaces?
Yeah, so great question. So, if we move zoom out of the way here, if we looked at the devices that live here, as you brought up, for anyone that's unfamiliar, we have this concept of tenants that can be attributed to different objects. So these devices have been associated to a tenant. Prefixes are the same way, they can be associated to a tenant, and now a namespace. In the past, the tenant was a part of the uniqueness bounds from a prefix standpoint. So if we go back in prefixes, we can kind of see that tenant relationship. So moving forward, namespaces, as I mentioned, form the totality of the uniqueness boundary for the address space. The tenant is still available, but what we're going to be moving tenant to is more of a business label, right? So you'll be able to continue to use the tenant model as you have in the past, associating tenants to objects and so forth. But really what it's going to be is just a way to label something as being owned by that tenant, so forth, right? So it's actually probably a little more flexible kind of going forward, and we want to expand the usage of the tenant model to more objects in the future through the 2.x train, but certainly into 3.0 as well in the future. So you'll see more usage of tenant, but it is going to be less confusing because it is going to be more of just an ownership label going forward.
Got it. So tenant isn't going away, but we are repurposing it and giving it a new identity, I guess, if you will, as we move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Another question came in as you were moving on to the idea of locations and this new concept. Can you explain kind of locations and maybe give some real world examples comparing that's to the traditional regions and sites, like maybe folks might be used to, and kind of like how you might transition from regions and sites over to the location model?
Right. Yeah. Good question. Yeah. So what you're mentioning with regions and sites, right? Those were the two kind of location entities that existed in Nautobot v1, or even further back for those that have migrated. So what we have done with the introduction of locations and their enhancements in 2.0 is removed region and site. And so the location scheme is the only location entities that we have in Autobot. So it's much easier to keep up with from that perspective. And it's much more flexible. So regions in the past allowed you to do kind of recursive trees. So you could create the same parent-child relationships, but regions didn't have a type before, right? So we couldn't say that locations have the specific type, like in the example that I've created with the university campus here. We can't say that this is our campus and this is our buildings and departments, right? So it's kind of ambiguous in that sense. And then also the location types that we've introduced allow those data constraints now, where you can say that devices can only be assigned to these types of objects at this specific part of the location hierarchy. So that is nice. If you are upgrading from Nautobot v1, you don't have to worry about recreating your data or doing anything with it. We will automatically recreate whatever you have from an existing region hierarchy in all of your sites. Those will be converted automatically, and what you'll wind up seeing is if we go look at just our location types here, obviously the example I've created with campus and buildings and departments, you'll see something like this for these two records here for region and site. The day that you upgrade to Nautobot v2, your location types will just be region and site as they existed previously, and then going forward, you'll be able to take advantage of these new capabilities.
Right. So unlike the tenant, which is remaining just repurposed, regions and sites is going away. We are migrating to the location types, if I understand what you're saying correctly.
Yes, and importantly, you don't have to worry about that data. We are taking care of it for you automatically as a part of the upgrade.
Yep, it's part of that migration that's going to happen, but don't be surprised for those maybe that are doing that upgrade that it is going to look a little different as you move transition from regions and sites over to locations. Okay, great. I think that is all the questions we have here on this section. If we can move on to the next section, we're going to be talking about the Nautobot app ecosystem. We're going to go through a few of these apps here in detail today. So we can go to the next slide, John. Currently, today, we've got 13 applications and always growing. We are continuing to add to this very robust ecosystem as it is today. We are going to go through a golden configuration application and the floor plan application here today and give you some little bit updates on what we've done there, as well as what was occurring in 2023. So on the floor plan application, this was a new and exciting app that we introduced this year, allowing you to visualize your space, whether that's a data center or maybe a colo, giving you that bird's eye overhead view of your floor plan, allowing you to lay out what your data center or colo looks like. This is a great addition to the already data that we have down there in the source of truth. Now you're able to visualize that data in a really consumable fashion and in a really flexible fashion. So we are able to have the consolidation of our documentation in one place, in Nautobot, and in a standardized format. So we're not having to go to different databases or different tools to maintain this information. And of course, with everything that Network to Code does, very, very customizable, extensible, so that you can take and make it work in your environment. The rack tiles are dynamic. We can scale this to any size floor plan. We can have multi-tile objects, whether those are your UPSs or maybe your crack devices over on the side that sometimes will take up multi-tiles, or even maybe particularly large racks we have here available as well. Doing custom tile dimensions and custom status colors. So as you can see here in the example, showing off, the hot aisle and the cold aisle in red and blue, for example. And then maybe you have some racks, tile locations that are unusable. So those are, maybe they're marked in gray or for future use. Really being able to model, plan, and understand your floor space as you work through your environment. Jump, we can go to the next slide. And then how did the relationships occur out there in the real world compared to what we're modeling in the data? So being able to understand those relationships, those connections, rack elevations, device information, site information, and the way all of this is tying together in one visualization. So for example, I could start here on the top of my floor plan. I can drill into a rack. I can now see what's in that rack. So here you see that example here. Hey, we clicked on that CDG02 101 rack, clicked into it. Now we've got that visualization, and I'm looking for that specific device down there in somewhere around U20. I'll double click on that, and then now I'm in that edge router, right? So I could traverse the entire tree very seamlessly and easily as I move down into those details of the UI. So that is a good overview of floor plans and racks. We are going to move off here to hand over to Jeff to be able to start talking about the Golden Config app. And while he's doing that, we do have a question coming in here from the audience. We probably will address it coming up next, but about importing dynamic DSIM data into the data center app in Nautobot, so the floor plan app in Nautobot. We'll get to that in the end here. We'll go cover that topic there for you, Justin. But for now, we're going to hand off to Jeff and talk about the Golden Config app.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, as Tim said earlier at the beginning, my name is Jeff Kayla. I am a senior architect at Network to Code. And today I'm going to be just introducing some of the new feature sets that came into Golden Config over the last year. So I'm very excited about all these. I'm one of the maintainers of the project. So it was a lot of hard work by the team, and I'm excited to show them. Similar to what John had mentioned earlier, there actually was an entire webinar previously that was dedicated to these features. So if you have an urge to get a little bit more information and actually see a full end-to-end demo, I encourage you to go find that recording on YouTube. So yeah, so we're going to cover Nautobot Golden Config app and what's new with it as of the 2.0 release. Really, a lot of these features did go in the 1.6 train of Golden Config right at the end before we switched over to 2.0, so they are available there as well. And so we're going to talk quickly about what pieces were added. So Nautobot had already had a lot of the data available for everybody to utilize to do configuration management. Nautobot and Golden Config specifically expanded that to really be able to identify misconfigurations and find extra and missing configurations that were currently out there on the network. But we had always heard, and we had always strived to provide this as well as, okay, great, I know now what was missing, the extra config that I have on my devices, but how do I actually remediate those? So that's one of the biggest pieces that was added to the new feature set of Golden Config, was being able to generate remediation commands. And then also finally, the ability to actually deploy those remediation commands as well. So I'm going to quickly cover the existing features that everybody was used to. So obviously the existing features from all the way back when Golden Config came out, you were able to do backups of your configurations if you wanted to do that within Nautobot, or the app was also flexible enough to be able to actually take in a Git repository and actually utilize that. So if you had another tool like Rancid or any other of the other tools out there that were already doing your backups and you didn't want Nautobot and Golden Config to do that as well, you could just link that instead. Another piece that already existed was being able to generate intended configurations, which is very powerful. You could specify templates, and now you're using your source of truth data alongside templates to actually create your intended configurations for devices. And you could do that at an iterative level. So maybe you didn't want to try to tackle generating an entire configuration for a switch. You could do that on a per feature level, or do just what you care about at that given time and expand upon that going into the future. And the final piece that was the initial feature set was actually being able to take your backup configuration and also your intended configuration that you had generated inside Golden Config and do a diff and a comparison to really do compliance reporting on your configurations out there. So you can see in this slide, there's an example of what your intended configuration for a given feature, in this case, interface, should look like, what it actually looks like. And it was powerful enough to determine out of those two diffs, what was missing and what was extra. So we got to this point and the natural progression of the app was, okay, now we have everything we need. How do we take this to the next step, create a remediation config and be able to actually deploy that? So moving on to the new features, we did this in kind of 3 different perspectives from the application. So we didn't want to just blindly be able to remediate configurations. And we also wanted to be flexible enough if you had another tool that maybe you wanted to use Golden Config to generate that remediation config, but perhaps you prefer to use Ansible to actually deploy it. So we came up with the concept of a config plan. And a config plan is basically taking a configuration compliance result, and you have multiple different types, and I'll cover that shortly in the demo. And you can generate an actual configuration plan for that. So you can see here on the left-hand side, we have this configuration plan. And that configuration plan is exactly what you need to run on your device in order to get your device into compliance. So the other reason we wanted to introduce the configuration plan is actually for that approval step. Nobody wants to be able just to configure their plans or make changes to their network without some type of human approval process. So configuration plans get created in a non-approved, and then there's a requirement there that the plan changes into an approved state. And lastly, we also added the ability for Golden Config to actually deploy a configuration plan, which has been very powerful as well. So that's kind of the slides I have for today. And I'm going to move into a short demo. So you can see, similar to what John was showing before, here's kind of the homepage of Nautobot 2.1 with the new UI skin on it. I'm going to spend most of my time today here in Golden Config. So this application, again, has some new feature sets to it, but this is what you're tend to used to. This is looking identical to what it always has. You can see here, you have some backup statuses, intended statuses, compliance statuses. So if we focus on what was added to the next train was specifically remediation. So remediation gives you the ability to actually have your plan to take your configuration from out of compliance and bring it into compliance. So that's what this remediating configuration does here is it takes your intended, your actual, and your extras and comes up with a plan for you to generate and how to get that device into compliance. So you might be asking, okay, how does it do that? So let's quickly jump into your remediation settings. So we built this very flexible. The default remediation type supported in Golden Config is using HireConfig, which is an open source library out there written in Python. And that is the overall background of how it can actually take those configurations and come up with a plan and know when I have child configuration and I need to know it out, or maybe you're in Juniper and you have to do a disable and or a delete. So it has all the functionality there to actually be able to support the ability for the app to know how does this specific operating system and its specific configuration act, and how do you negate a command, and how can you override a command. So within here, I have everything set to HireConfig, but there is also the ability to come in and actually do a custom remediation, which is very powerful and gives you the ability just to write your own custom Python code in the backend and reference it. And then you can actually have your own custom remediation plans be generated from something that maybe your business logic determines that maybe higher config doesn't do natively. You can also see there's some remediation options here. So whether you're using custom remediation and you have some inputs into your forms, or if you're using higher config, you can actually overload some of the default settings there. So that's how remediation and the settings work. And the final piece to that is simply the ability to turn on and off remediation per rule. And we found this to be something that was definitely a requirement for this. There might be certain configurations, specifically maybe BGP, where you don't want remediation to ever run. It's perhaps too risky. If you have your connection to your ISP and you're downloading the internet IP table, maybe you would never want to run any type of remediation on it. So you could turn it off and kind of keep that out of scope. So it is flexible enough you can turn on and off that feature based on not only your platform, but also the specific rule for that platform. So let's go into configuration plans, because that is kind of the bulk of where a lot of this logic works. So as I mentioned before, configuration plans were our way to be able to represent this is what is going or what is planned to be done on this device and give you a status, whether it's approved or not approved. You can also see you can link change controls and URLs perhaps to ServiceNow or any other change management tool. But you also have the flexibility here to create a plan type. So plan type for intended, missing, and remediation are all directly going back to that compliance that was run. So I showed that detail view before, where you have all of your compliance information, you have your intended, you have your actual, you have your missing. And it's using these based on your last compliance run to actually generate configurations that you would need to run on your specific ask. The last one I wanted to touch on is manual. Manual gives you the ability to access directly the object that you've selected in your plan and generate basically an ad hoc, perhaps a break fix type of change. So I'm going to use kind of a basic example here. And I'm actually going to use Jinja templating here to say, for the given object that I'm generating this plan for, I want you to go into that object and I want you to pull in your actual host name. So again, this gives you the great ability to be able to start utilizing your source of truth data, your trusted data, to actually start configuring your network based on that data. So if I go in here and I look, you can see it generated a ton of different config plans, one per device. And if you click on the config set, you can see the interpolation happened where now it actually took the device name and put it into a command syntax that you would then be able to deploy, even if you were trying to do something as simple as get every host name on your network to match your source of truth data. So finally, I'll just quickly cover the other plans. I had purposely generated some of those beforehand just to avoid waiting. And you can see here, I have a remediation example. Again, in this case, I was saying I want to do a remediation plan. I want to do it on this specific feature for this specific device, and I'm wanting to see what commands I need to run to get that into compliance. So you can see you have a config set. It has your negation command, it has your new command, and this is what could be deployed using Golden Config. So that's the last piece that I'm not going to touch on today, is the actual deployment. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have an entire webinar dedicated to these new features where we actually did make changes to live devices. So I encourage you to check that out if you're interested. So that is a remediation plan. And then as I mentioned before, the intended plans and missing plans do the same functionality where they can go, you can reference features, and you can actually generate specific commands based on that. So again, here's a little bit bigger of an example. This wasn't intended for every single feature. and you can see what it would actually spit out for you to configure on your device to match it up with what it's intended to be there. So that's the demo. Again, the last piece that I'm skipping today is just simply the deployment. And that deployment, like I said, would literally take a config plan, use the config generated, and it would configure that device. So that's what I have for the demo. Tim, was there any questions today?
Yeah, actually, there were a few that came in. One was about that the notion that it seemed like the actual state and config plan were the same. That question did come in earlier, so hopefully as Jeff went through and explained what config plan does, hopefully that became clear that they are not the same. Just to reiterate though, in case it's not clear, the config plan is essentially the series of steps that we need to go through in order to get from the current state to the desired state. So it's how do I take what my intention is and make sure that the device actually reflects that. And on your traditional device, that is not necessarily a straightforward path. And creating that config plan can actually be quite complicated. And that's a lot of what we've done here in this work, is to make that as easy as possible and to be able to streamline that process so you can get consistent, reliable results out of this type of solution. We did have another question, Jeff, coming in around what products does config plan currently support, and maybe is there a roadmap for the future? Maybe if you could just talk a little bit kind of about how we go from this theory into practical real world of I'm using NXOS, or I'm using Arista, or I'm using Juniper.
Sure. Yeah. So as far as the current supportability, it is if you want out of the box supportability, that would be if higher config supports it, then this would be able to generate plans based on it, off of it. So that's a lot of the hierarchical, I can never say that word, config out there, your Aristas, your Ciscos. But I know just recently higher config had a merge request go in for Juniper as well to be able to do set and delete commands. So again, super flexible as far as out of the box. But I would just want to make sure I reiterate that you do have the ability to write your own custom compliance and custom remediation functionality just with regular Python. So perhaps you have a platform that's not just supported out of the box. Yeah, you can write your own logic in Python, and basically Golden Config can inject that in and read from it and generate your plans based on your own custom Python.
So you're saying basically out of the box, we support anything that is in the hierarchiconfig project, open source, very heavily community driven project. And then of course, there's also the custom option if for some reason it's not in hierarchiconfig or you want to do something maybe that's just a little unique to your business.
Correct. Yeah, and like I said earlier, even within hierarchiconfig, you have your own options within this application inside of the remediation settings to overload and overwrite some of its default functionality. So if hierarchiconfig's defaults don't quite work for you and you just need to tweak a few things, it's actually as simple as just putting those into your remediation settings right within Golden Config, and you can overload some of that functionality.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I think our next section up here will be coming is Nautobot Cloud. So we are going to transition over to Jason, who will talk about that. We'll just give Jason 1 second to get his screen share going. For those that do, feel free to keep the questions coming into us, and looks like Jason's ready to go. So.
Cool. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and dive into Nautobot Cloud. And Tim alluded to it earlier. I think now's a good time to kind of build upon what John and Jeff have been saying around all the goodness within Nautobot itself. We call Nautobot Core, Nautobot Apps. We have Golden Config. We have Floor Plan. Next logical question is, how do you quickly get started as an enterprise to consume Nautobot, consume apps, right, into production? And when we look at the past couple of years, Nautobot is turning 3 actually next month. And over the past 3 years, we've worked with a lot of customers on Nautobot deployments, infrastructure deployments, upgrades, monitoring, and all those things that you would expect, right, in a production application. And things take time, right? When you're engaged in larger organizations, you have security teams, data center teams, cloud teams, network teams, database teams, right? It takes weeks to months or longer to be able to get a new application into production, right? Let alone start bringing up things like ALBs and load balancers, right, for high availability. And Nautobot Cloud is really the creation, right, within 2023 that we launched to simplify the consumption of Nautobot. Or so think about Nautobot on demand, or think about Nautobot apps on demand. You want to try an app out? Let's quickly go to a marketplace and get it installed and try it. Nautobot upgrades on demand. At the end of the day, we want to think about, we want to think about infrastructure, or we want you to think about infrastructure less, so you can focus on things like consuming data in Nautobot, consuming automation in Nautobot, and then building more and more automation, right? Leveraging all that rich data that's stored inside Nautobot. It's kind of what Nautobot Cloud gives us. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to skip this one slide to save a minute or two, and go right into a Nautobot Cloud, right? High level demo. And similar to what the team has alluded to, there's a prior webinar on Nautobot Cloud. If you haven't seen it, feel free to take a look at it online, or even better, reach out. We can do a live one-on-one demo to really poke around, look at every nook and cranny, right, in the UI, see what Nautobot Cloud has to offer. But the first thing is that that if you kind of look at the workflow of getting Nautobot up and running, right? The first thing that we would see when you log in is our landing page. We get to see some active Nautobots that have been deployed. If we want to deploy a new one, right, we'd see the create button up here. We're in our organization, Megacorp. We click create. And the first thing that we would see is now a delineation of Nautobot and Ansible, right? And now again, product Nautobot Cloud. So a key highlight for us is all those things I was alluding to around Nautobot, but there's also Ansible support within Nautobot Cloud as well, right? So if I were to click either one of these, Nautobot or Ansible, within minutes, we would have a new instance or a new server booted up. This could be a production, dev, test, whatever it might be. If you want to be able to have an isolated instance, you can now get that instance up to start doing more testing, right, in Nautobot or Ansible. So for now, if I click through to Nautobot, we'll see to get an instance, we call it a resource in Nautobot Cloud, up and running. There's really minimal inputs that are required. You give it a name, give it a description. You pick an image, which is really a version of Nautobot. We click an image. We get to see some preferred or defaults, and then many more based on all the iterations of minor and patch releases that have come out, right, over the past several months. We assign it a project. The project is really an encapsulation of resources and servers. So I can have my own project. We can have a dev project, right? Things like that. And ultimately choose access type, private or public, right? Based on the setup and deployment architecture, it could be public on the internet, or it could be private, right? If there's private connectivity between Nautobot Cloud, right, and a client environment. If we were to look at some other tabs here, settings, this is where if you've seen Nautobot already or deployed Nautobot, a lot of the environment variables you might want to tweak for deployment. You have full access to do that within a new resource getting created as well. And there's some shortcuts here to pick and choose which apps you might want to deploy. Right, today we've discussed floor plan and goal to config. So it wouldn't be too hard if we checked these, click create, right? Within a few minutes, we would have a brand new Nautobot created with those apps. So the create is kind of like that first step that would happen within Nautobot Cloud, right? If we were to click in one of these, this is version 206, we might not see a full deployment, full upgrade because of the time we have on the webinar. But the second step might be an upgrade, right? We have version 206 deployed right now for Nautobot. If we wanted to upgrade Nautobot, all we would need to do is click this drop down, pick a new image type, click save. We're going to get prompted if we want to restart Nautobot and do the upgrade now or do it later. For the demo, I'm just going to say, we're going to restart this later. Restart now. The upgrade takes anywhere from 4 to 6 to 8 to 8 minutes to fully boot back up. And we do see that state has changed as well. So this is pending an update. If we were to update Nautobot, then when it kind of restarts, we would have version 2.1 there. Third thing I'm going to show is the marketplace in Nautobot Cloud, right? You kind of saw the shortcut. If you're already familiar with the apps and you're creating a new instance, you can just check the apps that you want to install. Here's kind of where you can kind of browse to learn a little bit more, right, about those apps that are available, right, in the cloud marketplace. Again, mentioning Gold to Config and Floor Plan to name those because they were highlighted previously, right, in the last half hour or so. But any other app here, you can kind of spin up a new personal or dev instance. You want to play around with Floor Plan or Gold to Config. Maybe production is just source of truth with BGP models and firewall models, and you can create a brand new resource, get new apps installed, and if they work to your liking, then you can now migrate them into production. Okay. If I circle back here to look at our list view, let me go into maybe demo data, look at some other things that we can show. One of them is trends, and there's a lot of data that is inside each instance within Nautobot Cloud. Right, so trends starts to allow us to visualize some of that data. Right, it could be racks, it could be sites, right, locations, device counts, all these things. There's a number of dashboards that are built in, continuously adding new charts, new graphs, and things like that to better understand all the data, right, that is kind of locked away inside Nautobot. With Nautobot itself, you kind of get access right to the table views and things like that. This is really to bring it to life and start to understand, right, some of those trends. Snapshots, right, another key feature. This is where you can trigger a snapshot to be able to really a database snapshot if you want to do a daily or a recurring snapshot to make sure if you're going to prepare for an upgrade or just do a point in time snapshot to be able to maybe restore a snapshot for a dev instance, right? To the use case earlier, if you have your production instance, production data, but you want to stand up maybe a new app or do testing on a new release, you can do a production snapshot and then use that as a foundation for a new resource as well. Finally, to save some time, to save some room for questions at the end, and to let us finish up, there are a number of other settings, right, within the organization to be able to configure things like single sign-on for Nautobot and Ansible, to be able to have self-service VPN connectivity between Nautobot Cloud and on-prem, right, to do things like private network connectivity between an enterprise or infrastructure network and Nautobot Cloud. If we circle back, by and large, keep in mind that the overall premise and really thesis that we have is like there is a lot of time that is spent in managing infrastructure. This is everything from cloud infrastructure, or could be servers on-prem, where Nautobot and Ansible typically live, the monitoring for that infrastructure, as well as the upgrades to maintain them going from release to release, especially in open source, right? For both of these platforms, right? When you look at Nautobot, there's patch releases happening every few weeks, minor releases every few months, major releases, right? A little less frequent, but to be able to simplify the time and all the energy that it takes to be able to do all of that, and it really just keeps your time focused on using the tools, using Nautobot, using the data, driving automation, and really less worry and less concern about all the, let's say, infrastructure and the processes that have to happen right under the covers to bring it to life. I'll pause there on the clock, and we'll allow Tim to close it up for us.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jason. We did have a couple questions related to cloud, as well as an earlier one that came in about the DC floor plan application and how I might get dynamic data into that app. And I think what's kind of interesting here, and I'll let Jason give this answer, but that the idea that actually it isn't specific to the DC floor plan app as far as the way that you might bring data into Nautobot.
Right. I could probably show that a little bit in the marketplace. This lists, a couple of the apps, right, that are available. SSOT is really a primary app that we deploy quite a bit in our customer engagements. This application called Single Source of Truth is really a predefined framework and a pattern that allows us to synchronize data to Nautobot or from Nautobot. Right. So if you have third-party systems that has DSIM data, then we would be able to use the SSOT framework to be able to synchronize that data into those objects, be it racks or any data in Nautobot, and that can be scheduled on a recurring basis. Or if those other systems have some sort of event-driven automation, right? When those systems have changes, then clearly, we could use Nautobot APIs as well to start to populate that data in Nautobot.
Right. So I think if I understand correctly, basically the single source of truth app is the way in which we can bring data into Nautobot or from Nautobot. And it's regardless of what the underlying application is, whether it's DC floor plan app or other data that you might be wanting to synchronize in and out of Nautobot.
Exactly.
One more question for you on cloud. If I have custom applications maybe that I develop in-house, can I use those in Nautobot Cloud?
Good question. It's going to show that. So these apps, right, are all readily available, right? All open source too. And so we get that question a lot: is can customers use custom or tailored specific apps in Nautobot Cloud? Short answer is yes. We can actually show that here. They wouldn't be seen in the marketplace, but if we go to create a new Nautobot instance, we would see this example here, like Citrus Nautobot. Like this is an example of a demo where this has a packaged bundle of some custom apps that are packaged in the version 2.1.1 of Nautobot. So we would work with the clients, onboarding them into cloud to be able to onboard their custom apps as well.
Got it. So the custom applications are absolutely possible in Nautobot Cloud. They aren't going to be in the marketplace, but in cooperation with Network to Code on our side, we'll be able to make those available to any client as needed. So anything you do custom absolutely can be included.
Exactly.
Okay. Looks like we just have a few minutes left here, so we'll move into the final stages of the webinar. We did some Q&A there, had a few questions. Thank you folks from the audience that were asking us things as well. And just a quick review of the 3-pillar strategy. Wanted to give a little overview of what that means in practice or in action. Right. So as we take a look at this flow, if you think about, hey, starting from nothing where I don't have Nautobot or a good source of truth in my environment, and what could that look like? So we start off in week 1, right, with Nautobot Cloud is deployed. Perhaps maybe you need an automation or orchestration engine in your environment, and so then you might also deploy AWX. We're going to load that data into Nautobot using any of the number automated methods that we have within Nautobot and the applications to go out and find data in your environment, whether that's coming from a source of truth or actually from your live network. And we have now a functional source of truth deployed in weeks, not months or years. And from there, now we can start to take advantage of all those amazing applications that we have out in the environment available, whether that's Golden Config or the floor plan app like we talked about. But now we have this amazing foundation from which we can now drive and really begin the adoption of DevOps methodologies and infrastructure as code in our environment as we manage our network infrastructure. So in conclusion, we went a little overview of 2023 and what happened at Network to Code and all of the amazing things that happened in Nautobot land, specifically across these 3 major areas: Nautobot Core itself, Nautobot Cloud, and of course the app ecosystem. Jason, if we could move to the final slide. And so thanks everyone for attending. We have some links here for you. They were also some links in the chat to previous webinars. Please do go out and check them out. Reach out to us for a demo if you'd like to see deep dive into, say, the config plan or maybe Golden Config or floor plan app, and you want to learn more about those things or something that we didn't talk about today on the webinar. Please do reach out to us. We'd love to have a demo for you, customize it to what you're looking for. Thanks everyone for attending, and we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.